round of applause. Let's show some Dubai UAE love. There you go. Good to see you. I'll give you a fist bump. Do you need a clicker? You don't need a clicker. Then you don't need to return it. Here's your microphone. Cool. There you go. So,
hello. So this should work. Yes, very good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. In this panel, in this first panel of this day, we're going to address the question after we heard about the regulatory framework and the regulatory basis that the UAE is creating, in particular Dubai is creating here. We're going to discuss the investors, business and consumer facing aspect of it. And the metaverse is the interpretation of that. So the whole conversation that we're going to have in the next 30 minutes is around the question to which extent Dubai, who has always been a hub for innovation and technology advancement and a place where talent was captured and aggregated, to which extent Dubai can fill its historical role in that respect also as far as Web3 is concerned. And I have a very interesting panel this morning to discuss this conversation, an international panel that can give also an international view on that topic. First of all, as far as I'm concerned, my name is Hubertus Thonhauser. I'm a partner in Ghaf Capital, which is a Web3 focused venture capital firm based in Dubai. I'm also in one of my other roles, chairman of the board of the Tezos Foundation, which is based in Zug in Switzerland. I'd love to welcome my panelists on stage. Maybe to start with ladies first, Alexia Hefti from the Abed group. Alexia is investing in blockchain and especially blockchain-based regulatory tech companies. We have Josef Holm. Josef is a venture capitalist himself. He's partner in Draper, Holm, an early stage venture capital firm based in San Francisco and recently also moving to Dubai. And obviously, last but not least, we have, or before last but not least, we have Ralf Glabischnig, who is, you know, probably the Mr. Crypto Valley in Switzerland, one of the best connected persons I know in the industry, and recently also moved to Dubai as a founding partner of Crypto Oasis. And now, really last but not least, my friend, Dr. Marwan Alzarouni, the head of the Dubai Blockchain Center. Please, Marwan. So before we kick off with the conversation, I'm not sure if I need to give the word again to you to introduce yourself. I think we have done this. Let's be efficient and in the interest of time, jump into the conversation. So I would assume that everybody of you knows what Web3 is and what the Metaverse is, but just very high level to contextualize the conversation that we're going to have. So Web3 substantially is the evolution of the internet. It's the next stage and it's of the internet and kind of the what is commonly known as the internet owned by its stakeholders, which is in sharp contrast to Web 2, where big tech companies capture the data of users in order to support their business models. In Web 3, creators, technology builders and users all own part of the infrastructure. That's a substantial change. And the metaverse is kind of a phenomenon within Web3. And it's interesting because it's the convergence of various technologies like AI, virtual reality, augmented reality, and crypto. And that makes this whole thing so exciting, and it allows the blending of the physical and the digital world to create, you know, basically the new internet and the new social networks. Just in order to get a feeling, you know, where we are standing in this whole conversation, maybe to kick off with Ralf and also Josef, since you are representing the investor side, where would you see now from a pure technology standpoint, where are we standing now with the development of the building blocks of this metaverse and of Web3? Where are we and where are we heading to?
First of all, is this working? All right, first of all, good morning, everyone. Thank you to Hadi and the Agora team real quick for putting on another great event. It's always fun to be here. To answer your question, I think we're probably in 1997 in terms of internet years. As far as the metaverse is concerned, we're very, very early. Just like NFT started out with art as the main first application. Now we see games and the metaverse. I think the really interesting inflection point that we're reaching here now is that the metaverse and the digital world is becoming as important or maybe even more important than the real world, and COVID and the lockdowns around the world have accelerated that. So we are seeing a lot of new projects coming onto the scene. There is a lot of very interesting developments happening, but I think what we see now is not what we will be using in 5 years from now. So it's very, very early.
Yeah, probably to add on that, we see at the moment billions of dollars in investments in that, and these billions of dollars are coming on one side from the big corporates. I mean, latest when Facebook changed the corporate name to Meta, it was clear there is happening something which is going to be huge. On the other side, we have a lot of the Web3 companies investing in that, and money of investors like us are going into that market. And this new infrastructure is created now. I have seen there's the first customer center in the UAE already in the metaverse in the healthcare sector. So we see the development, and especially the combination of the real world and the digital world is, in my opinion, the interesting stuff on the metaverse side.
Yeah, an example for adopting the real world to the digital world was recently announced by the government of Barbados, which was the first sovereign country that opened an embassy in the metaverse. As well, so it was all over in the media. We have Alexia here. She's the ambassadrice, if you want, and the wife of the ambassador of Barbados, apart from her role as a blockchain investor herself. Alexia, can you give us an idea, what was the motivation to get into this platform and to get into this metaverse realm for a sovereign state? And this is maybe something that could be relevant to the UAE as well at some point.
Absolutely. So first, good morning, everyone. I don't want to say that I'm speaking on behalf of the government of Barbados. Rather, my husband was supposed to be here today, but has been called away on business. But I will speak to, what inspired it, since we've been a part of it. A lot of it actually, realistically, did come from the UAE. When we arrived here 4 years ago, there wasn't a Barbados embassy. In fact, we're launching our embassy just next month, physically in Abu Dhabi. But when we arrived here, we realized, how much was going on, what the regulatory frameworks that were being set up here in the UAE were really precipitating, creating the foundation for, a true and an excellent creation of business environment for blockchain. Now, the government of Barbados had an interest in setting up in the Middle East, and what better place to set up, of course, here, but also to start thinking about, as they were thinking of launching an embassy during COVID and the reality of complete lockdowns across the world, why not start thinking about how that could operate within the metaverse, which in reality, and what we've heard already, is quite frankly a lot of what our future is going to look like. In addition, was so important as well is that emerging market economy and governments don't have the same capacity as countries across the world. And so while Barbados has 15 diplomatic missions across the world because they cost over $1 million to set up, most emerging market countries face the same problem of saying, well, how do we conduct diplomacy and create bilateral relationships with other nations when it is so prohibitively expensive in a way that, European and the United States, as an example, have hundreds of diplomatic missions across the world. So setting up in the metaverse made a lot of sense, not only for what we're facing today as countries like Barbados, but the reality of where the future is going. And finally, there are things that we really have to consider, such as digital identity and all of the e-government services that realistically are going to comprise our future and the future of our children. And so that was really one of the foundational aspects of why we decided to launch a digital metaverse embassy for Barbados, and out of essentially the ambassador Barbados to the UAE.
And is, bilateral trade on the metaverse also something that you aim to realize with that, or is this just something that is too spooky to discuss yet? Because this would be the logical kind of consequence.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's interesting because diplomacy is a very traditional space. It's a space that wouldn't necessarily be so open to bilateral trade. But the reality is, since making the announcement, there are about 5 countries that have reached out and said that they'd like to consider building as well their own metaverse embassies to start engaging in bilateral trade in secure environments, within these decentralized worlds. Fascinating enough to see the first nation to launch a metaverse embassy, not launched on a centralized platform like Meta, but rather decentralized ones.
Absolutely. We had before that, Dubai has always been on the forefront of technology evolution. Dubai has always been a place created for others to succeed, right? So Marwan, you have been obviously the Mr. Blockchain in Dubai ever since. I mean, we've been knowing each other ever since the beginning of this initiative here in 2015-16. Can you give us your take on where we are standing in terms of the technology, the practical evolution and adoption of not only on a government level, but also on a business level of Web3 in Dubai? And what do you see as the challenges that Dubai is facing, particularly as a regulated, kind of a regulatory body?
Thank you, Hubertus. I think at Dubai, as you fellow panelists know, that each one of you has a story with Dubai, right? So let's start with one by one, right? So Alexia and Gabriel actually could have picked any embassy in the world and any country in the world to be based out of, and they picked Dubai. There's a reason for that. Josef as well, right? You could have picked anywhere in the world to base your VC, right? You picked Dubai. Ralf, the same, right? You could have stayed in Switzerland, right? So are you, right? You were one of the earliest people here, and even before blockchain, right? Every single one of us finds in Dubai something that addresses a need, and Dubai tries to play that role. Dubai tries to play the melting pot role for all the talents and all the creatives and all the passionate people about doing things done. Wherever your country or any other country could not even get your project done, Dubai gives you not only the incentive financially, geographically, logistically, even with the connections with like-minded people. Dubai is the place where you launch your projects. Dubai is the enabler. Dubai is the force multiplier. It has leadership that's visionary. The leadership here instructs the people under all of the levels in the government and the private sector to actually come to us. They encourage change, they encourage and foster innovation. And like Her Excellency, Dr. Mariam said, the road is paved and you have no excuses but to do the right thing, which is hit the ground running.
Yeah, but to this point, I mean, obviously, if technology evolves, you also have frictions, right? You take risks as a country embracing this technology early stage. As we all know, the blockchain industry also, especially in the early stages, involves some scammy projects. That's something which unfortunately you cannot avoid. So can you give us your take on, from Dubai point of view, how does a government or a country or an emirate in that case deal with the risk associated with illicit projects and illegitimate projects, and how do you shield them off? How do you identify them? And how do you make sure that the reputation of, the whole ecosystem is not damaged?
Look, any emerging tech is always going to be ahead of regulation. This is no doubt anywhere in the world, not only here in Dubai. And Dubai always tries to play the balanced role, and it's a very delicate balance. And what we do, as we said, what makes us different is our leadership, and our regulators have always open ears and always, welcome change. But what actually makes us really special in Dubai is partnership. We always partner with the top people in the industry to get things done. We listen to them, we take their guidance, we listen to our regulators, we listen to our international partners. We are not an isolated island. We have really good political connections as well as business and entrepreneurial connections.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can only echo that from firsthand experience. talking about the kind of public-private partnership and the support that we have here. Ralf, you have set up recently Crypto Oasis, right? So, you know, we know each other from Crypto Valley, from Switzerland. Maybe explain a little bit what was the idea of bringing these kind of ecosystem approach to Dubai, and why did you choose Dubai, and how do you see the risk that I just mentioned before in kind of identifying projects that probably don't deserve to be part of that ecosystem from the real ones in order to keep the clean image of Dubai itself?
So your three questions would take the other 15 minutes of the panel, but I try to make it short. First, why Dubai? Because it's an open business platform where you can scale on a worldwide level. And I think in Switzerland, we built some interesting foundations with the big protocols like Tezos and Cardano and others. But if you think about applications on top of that, Dubai is at the moment most likely the best place in the world to be. So on the second thing, when we started here the talks with Dr. Marwan and with others, I was reaching out to DIFC, ADGM, DMCC, DWTC at this time was not active in that space. And we have been looking for a partner. And I personally found DMCC very interesting because also regulated by ESCA, so by the mainland regulator, to find a solution for the whole UAE. We opened up in April last year, and now it's already 200 companies in the blockchain space registered in DMCC. And we found around 600 organizations in the whole UAE. So it grew very fast. And that's the reason also why we said, look, let's have an own brand for that region. Let's do this Crypto Oasis, where we have like an umbrella of what is happening here. And it should not be for only one free zone or one area. For me, this Crypto Oasis is a story for the whole Middle East. And there's a center of it, and the center is Dubai, and it's the business center of that region at the end of the day. And the interesting thing is, no one feels like a foreigner here because 90% are foreigners, and they really like that. When you go into other countries, like in the US, you're one of the 10% who doesn't feel really comfortable. And here, I personally feel very welcome when I'm here and talking to others. Now, with the risk appetite, of course, if there's something growing as fast as the blockchain industry and other industries, in the first time, there's scammers and similar things, and we need to have a joint effort to find out who are the legit projects, how can we mark them, how can we recognize them, and this is a thing we want to do. So when we bring up this registry of the 600 organizations in the Middle East, we want to give like a kind of a quality level, and this is a community thing. So I'm not, or my team is not in the role to do this alone. We need to do this together with people like Dr. Marwan, with other organizations, to find a first step of, let's call it rating. Even rating is a dangerous word, but a first step of quality assurance to make sure that all the proper things are done. It's important the project still can fail, but it failed in a proper way. It failed not as a scam, and that's what's happening. I mean, when you go into the startup and blockchain space, not only in the blockchain space, usually 8 out of 10 projects are failing. So be careful when you invest in projects. There's a big risk attached, but on the other side, there's a big opportunity. And I'm very happy to be part of this big opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Ralf. I think what we're doing here now in these early stages of the metaverse, everybody's trying to create the building blocks. Nobody knows yet where the metaverse will head. It's the same conversation to, as you said before, you know, to ask somebody in the 90s, where will the internet look like? Nobody knew. So we are in that phase. Alexei, I wanted to ask you, you're involved in Regtech projects, right? Do you see any kind of relevance and overlap in the portfolio companies you get involved in the projects that you're involved in with the metaverse as a platform, or is this too far-fetched?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So I'm chairman of the Abed group, which is an accelerator incubator based out of the Caribbean. We specifically focus on Regtech, which means we work primarily with governments and regulators. We look at their governance problems and we solve them. We build products to solve those. We utilize the Caribbean as a petri dish. So we launch our products on tiny populations, whether it's central bank digital currency or building a settlement system for CBDC or an asset-backed stablecoin for trade within national economies. We utilize that, and then we take our products abroad after they've been tried and tested. One of the things that, of course, operating globally, having our businesses and people operating all over the place, like all of you as well. One of the problems that we've been seeing and been trying to solve is that of business licenses. And we know that the UAE is a country, especially DMCC, DIFC, ADGM, all of these fantastic free zones, as well as the mainland, have really created frameworks to allow for ease of doing business. But business is still incredibly painful across the world, from having business licenses to dealing with taxation, to dealing with just regulatory arbitrage and frameworks all over the place. One of our most exciting projects that we're working on right now is the Metaverse Special Economic Zone. We're looking at launching a business license cross-jurisdictionally, and we're engaging right now with governments at this point to see and how businesses can operate with this business license within Metaverse Special Economic Zone and ultimately take advantage of regulatory frameworks across those jurisdictions. So to give you an example, should Barbados and the UAE or Barbados and DMCC ultimately sign on to MSAs? What that would allow companies to do is a Barbadian company could operate as well within the UAE and take advantage of the amazing crypto regulatory frameworks that are already in play here. And that's incredibly important and something that we're seeing as valuable, considering that the businesses of the future, even those of today, quite frankly, with digital nomads and DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, and again, the businesses of the future being the metaverse businesses that are going to operate entirely in the metaverse. The reality, again, is they operate nowhere and everywhere at the same time. And we need to create a framework for businesses that allows them to easily operate across the world.
Yeah, that's exciting stuff. Talking about just the building blocks of the metaverse, a big conversation that has been going on recently was the discussion about centralized versus decentralized metaverses. You probably heard about Facebook, now renamed as Meta, who just want to expand their business model to that new kind of digital realm. I just wanted to get your take on where do you see this going? I mean, is this going to be playing out more as a centralized version, the metaverse, or is decentralization, like project like Sandbox, Decentral, etc., going to prevail where the users, the builders all own part of the infrastructure? What's your take on the general evolution of that? And maybe Joseph, you want to take the lead here.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. It's a very important point as well, right? Because I think many people don't fully understand the difference between something like Meta and the fully decentralized metaverse. And it's very important to talk about the erosion of privacy protection around the world and consumer protection also. What happens in a metaverse if someone steals your identity? What happens if you get deplatformed? Because it's not in the web 2.0 we uploaded our photos and videos and shared stories. Now you're entering the metaverse as your persona lives on the metaverse. What happens if they just shut you down? Like a whole big portion of your life would just be gone all of a sudden. What's the recourse, right? Where do you go? And I see that very problematic with platforms like Meta because of their poor track record. But also in decentralized metaverses at this point, there is no governance model and no recourse for anyone who has problems, right? And that's a big opportunity for Dubai to create a framework and regulatory environment where companies can build metaverses that take this into account. I think it's very, very important and often overlooked.
I think when I may jump into that, deplatformed is an interesting term. When you think about a very theoretical example, you're a former US president and you're taking off of Twitter. That's what deplatformed means. And this is probably a big chunk of his life
Yeah,
being on
love him
Twitter.
or hate him, it's not right.
So someone is taking you off from a centralized platform, and you know, we in our world we see often people trying to steal the identity and say, "Hey, I'm Ralf, I'm Marwan. Please send me some money. I lost my funds." This is happening every day in our digital world, and there's really something happening. And when we look back the last 20 years. We haven't been good in decentralization. Business worldwide centralized faster than ever. The Ghaf companies in the US are ruling the world at the moment. And my hope and my belief in the decentralized world is to get a little bit of this power back for the rest of the world. And this is a big challenge, and I'm not sure if it's gonna really happen, but this is one of my targets, to get power back for projects which are sitting here in the room for everyone else in the world, and not for being ruled by 5 companies worldwide.
I agree, and I think this is one of the concerns that were shown in a number of international conferences. Even when it comes to international organizations, the risk of the platform is still there because it's too much power. So if you look at, I don't want to mention names of platforms, but there's a lot of stuff tied to them. For example, single sign-on schemes, they're platform-based now. Identity is platform-based. You know, payments are getting more and more platform-based. The more we step away from that, the more we have a concentration of power with these platforms, the better it is for everyone. And I think the decentral technologies such as blockchain and whatever other technologies that are built on top of it, like the Metaverse and Web3 in general, are going to enable us to do, you know, provide the consumer with variety, which is what we need, and, you know, limit the risk of platforms. But I think an important step would be to actually have bridges between these different, not have them in isolation. I don't know if the mic is working.
I think it's not working anymore, huh? No.
I think the important thing is not only have silos, but also have bridges between different metaverses and different applications. And I think this is what we're building and what we're seeing the progress in within the space. And I think it's not only DeFi, but DeFi is the beginning and the fuel that will create these kind of projects where you can transition between different platforms and different ecosystems seamlessly.
Alexia, any take on that conversation, decentralization versus centralization? Where do you see this heading? And how do you see also, I'd love to get your take on that. How do you see the question of, you know, legal responsibility of a nation state versus the metaverse? I mean, let's just imagine somebody doing some stupid thing sitting in Germany on the metaverse. Who is in charge? Is this the metaverse? Is this the land that is operating in on the metaverse, or is it the nation state where the IP address is sitting? How do you see this? Where do you see this heading?
Yeah, that's actually so interesting, because we've been working with some lawyers that specialize in the Vienna Convention to start looking through some of these issues, because they're not issues that anyone's talking about. And the reality is, those are the questions that we're going to be facing soon. Those are the challenges we're going to need answers to. It's interesting when we think about what you just said, you know, about deplatforming an individual like the former president. The reality is that on these centralized platforms, we could completely deplatform a nation and its people. You know, and that's quite terrifying. So until you get to a point where governments set up their own platforms, and perhaps we need to ask ourselves whether we even want that to occur. The reality is, you know, when we looked at the Metaverse Embassy for Barbados, a decentralized platform is really the only way a sovereign nation would want to go in the interim, because a centralized platform would give private power control over it and therefore eliminate the concept of sovereignty. Yeah, it's definitely, we're looking at dispute resolutions, and I'll not speak for the government side, but on the Metaverse Special Economics Zone side, we're actually looking at dispute resolution mechanisms within the private sphere as well. Because the reality is, assuming, you know, in this case, you're getting a business license within MSAS, would you be utilizing traditional forms of dispute resolution mechanisms, or where would that be? Who would govern? It's questions that, we really have to ask ourselves and we need to start building for if we want to allow all of ourselves today to enter and not be worried about operating within a vacuum. But still, many questions unanswered. We're building on that now.
Yeah, it's an extensive topic. Obviously, we could speak about this for the whole day or the whole week. We are approaching the end of this first panel. We have another minute to go. Before we wrap it up, maybe just other questions from the audience you want to address to my colleagues or to the panel that we can answer. If, yes, please.
I guess I want to reiterate the concern about the centralized metaverse. A year ago, I had my full Facebook account for 1 day of reviews. It's been over a year now. And what I didn't realize is I'm using Facebook as single sign-on for all these other services. So when Facebook puts your account under review, I didn't do anything wrong. It was like, it literally just was, looks like a random thing. I wasn't able to log into all these other services. So I think there's a danger of both intentional deplatforming, which we're seeing with like the Canadian truckers right now and the threat to close their bank accounts. And then there's sort of this knock-on effect that people don't really understand just how deeply these single sign-on instances can reach into your life. So I just want to reaffirm that it's a valid concern that you're all raising. And I hope that there's a way to manage it so that people can take full advantage of this environment, but not become even more vulnerable to these centralized systems of control that there's really no appeal from. So I just want to thank you.
Good point. I think at the end of the day, this question whether or not decentralization will prevail over centralization will be answered by the audience, by the users. And what we're seeing now is a generational shift. People are more and more aware about their identity, about the sovereignty, and I think this will eventually also influence regulators and the adoption of this technology. So, yeah, you want to make a closing remark, Marwan? Please go ahead.
So I'll give you a very good example. So all of us have emails, and a lot of times when you're not using single sign-on from a platform, you're using your email as identity, and your email depends on a domain name. So imagine like your name at google.com. You are relying on a third party as well. But decentralization, an example of that is we have now domain name services like ENS and the Unstoppable and other ones where you own your domain name. You're not renting it. Even if I own my own domain name like Marwan.com, I'm actually not owning it. I am actually owning in the normal domain name sphere. I'm actually renting it only. But in the decentralized ecosystem where we have unstoppable domain, that domain name is unrevocable and it's mine forever. So it's a substantial change that a lot of people do not realize.
Thank you, Marwan. I want to thank my colleagues for this morning's panel, for your time, for joining us. I hope the content was useful for you guys. Yeah, want to wrap it up here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great panel. Good job. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And who do I give the audience microphone back to?